I can't not open and ask you about the fact that you not only appeared on the weakest link, but if my sources are correct, you won the weakest link.
I did.
The
I feel
actual
like
weakest link. How? When? Who was the host? And what the hell happened? How did that happen?
well, it was vintage weakest link with the OG Ginge and Robinson. I was 21 years old, and you're not the first person to have doubted that fact either. Actually, like my parents were waiting for me outside the studio, and they insisted on actually seeing the check before they believed me. So I thought I was
How much was it?
It was 1,800 quid, which isn't actually a lot if you think you can win
Yeah.
10 grand. But for a 21-year-old, I felt like a millionaire.
Welcome to The Fix. Sit down with copywriting experts Nick O'Connor and Glenn Fisher as they review, discuss, and improve real-world copy sent in by you. This is The Fix.
What made you go on the weakest link? This is so far from copywriting, although it's probably not actually, because I've got a feeling. I'll let you answer first. But what made you go on the weakest link?
It was a get rich quick scheme, really. So I suppose a lot of copywriting is that technically. I don't know. As a student, I just thought, well, what can I do to get a bit of cash? And I just went on I actually went on a couple of other TV shows before then, which are now like moribund. They died a death very quickly. It was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my life, and I don't know how I managed to win that money. It's all a blur. It's a dream.
So I was gonna. that is actually fascinating, and I was going to say that's ridiculous. That was your entrepreneurial. It was not like, because I'm really good at quizzes or anything. It was like, that's how I'll make money. That seems to make life hard for yourself, but. That's thrown me slightly because it's so insane. But like, how can I make money in life? I know I'll go on these quizzes that are hard to get onto and no chance of winning. But that's interesting in itself that you went through that route. Were you good at quizzes? Was like?
I would like to say I think just if you feel like you could be a little bit smart, I would say just apply for stuff, because unless you want to run the risk of public shaming. But again, that's something else that is good as a copywriter to learn early. I feel as we have all probably bombed in a pitch before. I feel like that was easy compared to things.
You've blown my mind because it's the least of all the answers I could have thought about. It's like, no, it was a way to make money. I was going to take on every quiz, and well done for winning. That is, it still seems like an achievement. And whether £1,800 is back in those days, but that's great. So I'm interested. You're 21. You've now been not now. I'm playing with tense here, playing with some tense and playing trouble. But you were 21 at one point in your life. You were thinking, right, how do I make some money here? I'm coming out of being a student, kind of thing, and I'm gonna. First of all, I'll go on all these quizzes. But other than that, you were going, right. How did you get into copy? You've been copywriting now for over 15 years. You've worked with some huge clients, and as we will get to at some point, you are now, they call it, I'm going to say they call it nomading. We will try and avoid that. I call it flipping around. We will try and come up with a better definition of it and describe it later on. We'll explore that because I'm fascinated by it. But now you're successful in inverted commas, and you're doing what you want to be doing. How did that start? Because as we've now discovered, you are slightly insane. That your entrepreneurial mind was like, I'll go on quizzes. Yeah. How did you actually get into copywriting? What happened there?
Well, I was living in Manchester at the time when in my height of my weakest link fame, and I was working at Manchester Academy, the gig venue. I graduated. I'm not entirely sure how, because I was completely rogue as a student. Anyone that's out there that's listening to this and they worry about their qualifications they got from university, please don't, because at the end of the day. I spent about 2 or 3 years working at Manchester Academy, which was too much fun, going to gigs every day. And I was there, I was blogging quite a lot. I've always loved writing. Little won writing prize and things and stuff like that at school. So to go from working in a bar to copywriting might seem like a bit of a jump, but because it was Manchester Academy, they were looking for someone to do gig listings and write blogs for them. So that was actually my entry point into it, and it was from doing quite a few years of that that my little brother actually told me that I should probably use my skills and see if I could do something with it professionally. So when the quizzing didn't work out, I started applying for internships down in London. So I actually moved back down from Surrey originally. So I had the privilege of being able to live at home whilst earning absolute peanuts or nothing actually at some of the internships. Working for music magazines. I actually started out doing that. So right at the very bottom of the ladder, and also technically quite old at that point. And compared to when I see people coming fresh out of university and going straight into advertising, I'm in absolute awe of it, because I think to have that kind of vision and direction, I had a few years of not really knowing what I wanted to do with my writing.
What year is this roughly?
So I moved back down to London 2011. I started doing internships. So I would have been about 25-ish.
So we're about contemporary in that sense. I don't want to age you by being as old as I am now, but that's 2000. Yeah, like I moved to London probably 2007, 2008. I was a bit older at that point, but the reason I raise that is because I feel like at that time, maybe the world of copywriting and, like, as you say, like you were writing blogs and stuff like that, it didn't feel as cohesive as it is these days, I guess. And it certainly didn't. It's interesting you're saying like coming out of uni. I don't feel like there was that. You would never come out of uni and go into copyright. That was never an option. If you said writing, like for me, it was like, I'm going to review books for The Guardian. And then go, well, that's only one person does that. And I don't know how to get job writing. Don't know how to get a job writing without going into journalism and all that kind of stuff. So when you're writing kind of blogs and stuff, when did you, or was there a moment when you thought, all right, I'm going to go into copywriting? When did you start thinking I'm in copywriting?
So I think I was exactly the same as you. I feel when I see working copywriters today, I feel like we kind of split into two camps. You've got the ones who knew what copy was from the very beginning, maybe went down the ad school route and got into it that way. Sounds like I had the same thing, where I thought journalism and content writing and editorial were the only things that I could do as someone that enjoyed playing with the English language and communicating and wanting to have that as a living. I was probably 27 years old when I found out what copywriting was and that it was even a thing. And that was when I first applied for my first agency in London. So I remember I was thinking, right, I'm doing a job at the moment, which was editorial for a company through Universal. So I was still very much in the music world. And then I swiftly realized that there wasn't necessarily a lot of, again, my entrepreneurial head, money to be made in and the sort of a long-term career necessarily to be able to do music journalism for me, because I wasn't, as good, wasn't that good. I started looking around agencies in London, found a really lovely little independent agency, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. But I managed to get in there as a copywriter with my portfolio of my blogs, my editorial content, to be able to prove my passion, my love for language. But I still remember going to those initial interviews thinking, wow, like copywriting looks like a really fun and viable career, but it was then having to introduce new skills, which I'd never even thought people did for a living. So, coming up with hooks and concepts and big creative ideas, because it was going into a creative agency. I remember those initial meetings. I was thinking, wow, am I someone who could fit into this job? And it just so happened that as soon as I started exploring what this was about, I really enjoyed it, and I really took to it quite quickly. I was really lucky to be in the setting of a really lovely sort of quite small agency who could really coach and guide me through that. And I'm always eternally grateful to those initial people who sort of introduced me into what copywriting was as a more formalized skill, rather than just me enjoying blathering on in blogs as I used to.
Well, you get in a catch-22, and I don't want to some extent, but you mentioned about like you were lucky in the sense that you could live with your parents and kind of get into the London scene. I feel like a Rimmel advert saying that, but you were in the you were able to do that and like intern and get like a little bit further down the line of that, and that's obviously a thing that not everybody can do. However, at the same time, it sounds like you were very aware that if you can get into a smaller agency, if you can get that little lead and kind of be proactive, I guess what I'm kind of leading you towards is that idea that you, at that point, you knew you needed to get with a group of people who could teach you about what was going to be happening, like how that industry worked. It wasn't like, right, I'm just going to like email people and say, can I write blogs for you and do this kind of stuff. You knew you had to kind of apprentice in that kind of world. Was that a conscious decision, was it?
It was to some extent. As soon as I found out that copywriting was a trade, I think apprenticing is probably a really good way of saying it. And I feel really sad that is probably something that's maybe been lost since COVID, because I do think about these, generations of younger creatives that are going to be coming through and don't have that benefit. Because I know that I had a manager called Paul Holder. I will send this to him so he can get a little shout out. Hello, Paul. He was my first. Hey, Paul. He was my first copy chief, and he was one of the best mentors and guides that I could have had in that moment. He understood that I probably thought I knew more than I actually did, because I was in my late 20s at that point. I've been writing for a while, but it's a very different skill to be able to use that knowledge and imagination in a way that is commercially viable. And I think to be able to be near someone like him, I could sit near him at his desk. If I had a question, I could go and ask him. If I was anxious about going into a meeting, he would be there to sort of have a little chat with me beforehand, because ultimately we've all got to go through that for the first time, and sort of being able to build your confidence like that, I think is something that you can only really do in person. So I feel that I feel very fortunate that I was able to have that in the sort of safety, and it was almost like a very family feel, this agency that I was in.
Sure. No, it's interesting, and I think it's a thing that people, it's like an obvious thing, but that community aspect and being there with people is important, but also people that can show you how everything else works and where you fit into that as a copywriter. I think that's a very valuable thing. So I'm interested to get to the flitting, but let's work our way along. You're in this smaller agency. You've kind of found out what's going on. Just describe up to more recent times, when you, like last October, when you decided to like go this way. You are now a freelancer. You've worked in a few different agencies. How was your career path? Did you have a plan, so to speak, or was it just kind of taken as it came?
So I think, like a lot of people, I have experienced redundancy before. So aforementioned lovely small agency, I think a big risk with that is that, when things are a little bit tough, sometimes that is something that can happen, especially for younger, less experienced creatives. So I did have that experience. I do believe that sometimes you have to go through those challenging things to make you feel stronger. And also, at that crossroads, I could have said, right, I'm going to give up. This isn't for me. But I was fortunate enough to find another position at a different agency. I went into the very niche world of employer branding, which, if you don't know about it, is essentially doing advertising and branding for brands as employers versus sort of commercial or like consumer products. So it's a very different approach to communicating a brand, because people may know what a brand is, but this is actually trying to get them want to be a part of it rather than buying the stuff.
Yeah.
So I ended up spending maybe about 5 years in a couple of different agencies doing that. So again, it was the whole time I was able to build my skill sets. During that time, I was able to do a lot more presenting and pitching and working with broader teams. And I just think that as much experience that you can get in doing these different things, particularly if it's something that scares you a little bit, I think is really important. And there was a time that I didn't like public speaking at all. And now I love presenting and pitching. It's one of my favorite things to be able to do and wheel out my ideas and get people to listen. So I think that was really important before taking the leap into the freelance world. I did freelance for a little bit, and then I ended up going in-house at a gym chain in London called Gymbox. Which had, as a brand, was a very exciting one to work on, because within branding circles, it is quite well known for having a disruptive, in inverted commas, nobody likes that word anymore, a disruptive tone of voice, and being able to be a little bit cheeky and playful and have fun with the sort of personality of the brand and help to cultivate that. So I think to go into freelance, having both in-house experience as well as the agency side was super helpful, because you get to see the lots of different ways of people working, different paces of things, like the pace of life within in-house brand copywriting versus working in an agency is completely different. You may also have additional pressures of working on your own sometimes, rather than being able to get teamed up with lots of different people with an agency. So for all those reasons, I think I did everything as I needed to before taking a leap into going freelance.
I want to ask, well, there's two things actually, and it might send me off track, but I just wanted to pick out, because I think it's interesting when you said you were used to be not enjoy like putting yourself out there, public speaking, like being confident and what have you, or whatever the insert kind of banal things there, but then you changed and you went, oh, actually no, I quite like this. What was the, I guess there's not going to be one moment, but what was the elements, what gave you, again, watch words, but what gave you permission to go, actually no, screw this, I'm going to be like this? Was it just more experience, or did something else change? Or
I think experience is really important, because I think one of the biggest things that holds people back from public speaking is a lack of confidence. And for a creative to come along in front of a client and say, these are the ideas I've just plucked out of my head, I think you need to spend a lot of money in doing them. Like that in itself is quite a mad process when you think about it. And I think the more experience you get as a creative to be able to back your own ideas will automatically put you in better stead to be able to stand there in front of a client and say, right, this is what I think is right, and let's talk about it. I think it's just practice as well. Like the more that you do anything, you're gonna inevitably find it's not even getting more relaxed around, it's finding your own style as well. And I think it's being comfortable to be able to do a pitch or presentation in what feels most natural to you, rather than thinking, oh well, I need to sound super professional, super formal, because it's especially as a creative, you got the luxury of being able to be the exciting razzle dazzle that's in any presentation. So it's kind of been able to just think, we're all just human beings, just sat in a room together. They happen to have the money, I happen to have the PowerPoint. Like just being able to understand that you are just connecting and sharing something. It, as I said, it takes practice.
I guess it's like, it's almost when you sit like saying they're the people with the money, they're in that thing, you're in your role, they're in their role. It's not personal. It's just that's the roles that you embody. So when you realize that, it actually kind of gives you a freedom to go, well, in that case, I'll be myself. It's not an attack on me if they don't like that. It's just that that's not the right thing, or for that particular role, for that kind of setting. And it's kind of getting the business aside from the personal, I guess, probably unlocks you a little bit. It certainly has for me, but it sounds like it's a similar experience that you've gone through.
Yeah, definitely. As I said, I think it's difficult to make that separation at the beginning because you are so invested in your ideas. And I think you obviously need to be invested in your ideas, otherwise it's not going to be a good idea if you don't care about what you're putting out there. But I think it's been able to understand, as you said, the difference between that. And yeah, I think it's sometimes just my favorite thing, especially if it was a pitch in person, I would just pick someone around that big scary looking boardroom, and I would get eye contact with them. The moment I could get them to smile, or I always like try and like do a really lame joke at the beginning just to try and loosen up myself up rather than anyone else. If I can see that person reacting or engaging or smile, I will just then talk to that person. I will obviously do the recommended, like moving your head around the room and talking to people, but it would always be that person I gravitate towards and I would be presenting to them. And I think even that, it sort of really helps to just remove the grandeur out of it. And I'm saying this as someone who has had a couple of pitches which have been one of the most excruciating experiences of my life. Like, I mean, worse than the weakest thing. Like, it's been painful, but I think you do have to have those painful pitches as well. And it will mean that, you know, how could it get any worse than that? As I said, I've had 2, so maybe that's not the best advice, but
doing all right. I've been in much. I've had more knockbacks than 2. I can tell you that much. So don't worry about that.
Yeah.
I always remember, and I'm going to just say it now because I've got to get it out of my head. When I was looking at your website, I noticed that you were. This is lame joke territory, by the way. But I noticed that you've worked for Tottenham Hotspur and Southampton, and immediately. I'm not a football man, as it will come as no surprise to most people, but I've got like a kind of almost like championship manager element of football where I know enough to be able to have a conversation about it. But I do know that Mario Pochettino is the only other person who has worked for both Tottenham and Southampton. So I wondered.
And I'm a Chelsea fan, so
you're a Chelsea fan.
That's a really nice through line there.
There you go. You don't know Mario Pochettino. At no point have you worked for Mario Pochettino. Just to clarify that for the audience. Good. Well, I'll use that as a stupid observation from myself, but it's out of my head now. But you have worked for some huge clients and what have you over your time. Have you've now gone freelance,
gone rogue.
You've gone rogue. Well, you've gone. You're moving around and you are flitting around, and you're coming to us from Portugal as we speak. You described it before we started recording as homeless, which is fine. But you've now created this world where you've got yourself a good brand. You've got that experience under your belt. You've got some good brands that people recognize and go, oh, right, wow, like McDonald's, Spurs, blah, blah. What happened to give you that? Was that collecting that over the working in-house? Talk me through that change and where you are now as a copywriter, because this whole process, it's both almost classic but completely unique as well. So I'm interested in the whole process of how do you get to, if someone just came across you today and they can find your website and they'd look at it and go, wow, like that's a really like experienced, like cool copywriter. How have they got all of that? But you can see it's quite a natural, organic way from just working hard through that and following your gut. So what's the final bit to get today?
I do, and I've said it a couple of times, I think doing the scary thing is actually the best thing that you can do a lot of the time. So I know that one of the biggest crossroads for me to be where I am right now was when I took the job at Gymbox. So I was working in an agency that I had worked with for a long time, and I was offered a full-time role there as head of copy, actually, which would have been amazing, you know, to be amongst my friends as well and to stay on there and to do things as I knew them to be. But I saw a job come up at Gymbox for in-house, and the idea of it scared the hell out of me because at the time the brand was very much just copy on a black background. That was it. and it's known for being quite like edgy and cool. And also, I don't do fitness, so all of these things, I was like, oh god, like it was all the imposter syndrome was coming out of me. I was just like, I don't know how to do that, but I was like, you know what, it might be quite a fun thing to do when I just see if I can get an interview. And then the interview process went well, and I got offered the job. And I remember I was working with a career coach at the time, and he was saying, you know, you've got to weigh up, do you want to stay with what's familiar and comfortable, or do you want to go out and do this big thing where you've got nowhere to hide, especially because you need to be like cracking jokes and, yeah, as I said, being quite cool in that. So I did the thing that I found most scary, because I thought, well, there's lots of positives to this as well as it being a little bit more intimidating. Primary reason being it would get me out of being in a niche. Niches can work for some people, but I didn't want to end up being just an employer brand copywriter. I wanted that to be one of my skills, not my only skill. So I do think that making that break, doing the scary thing, actually started to put me on the path to doing what I'm doing now, particularly because after a year of working for that sort of consumer brand, other people saw my work and they got in touch about me freelancing for them. So one of my main clients is Moju, who are one of the fastest growing soft drinks brands in the UK, in fact. They make functional shots, so like really delicious but really spicy ginger shots, amongst other things. But they really liked my work for Gymbox, and that was one of the reasons why they approached me about a brand project to begin with, and that was in 2020, and I'm still working with them now. So yeah, I think
I'm interested in that then, because I think that's probably where a lot of people, I think that might be an experience for a lot of people. You've gone to Gymbox, you've gone to a brand, you've got a job, and you are showing your ability through that job, which is the key thing in all of life, is show don't tell, and show that, oh, this is the work that we're doing. There is a magic in inverted commas and what have you. When you do that stuff, people go, I'd like that stuff for my company, for my business, or what have you. And the cleverer ones will go, well, who's doing that for them? And they'll come to you and approach you like that. As a copywriter then, and obviously it's your private life, so you don't have to share whatever you want, but how do you go from working in-house for a company? Do you have a conversation with them about freelancing? How did you move to that? Did you have to then make the leap out of there? Because I think that's probably where a lot of people face the challenge of like making the leap from being in-house to being freelance. You want some proven clients that are coming in, so I've got a few leads, but then there's always that unknown. What was your experience of kind of not breaking free in a negative way, but like moving beyond just being at Gymbox?
Well, I think I should, for context, say that I've got the benefit of not having children or a mortgage or a marriage to worry about. So it was very much I could just think solely for myself, because I can totally appreciate anyone with those kinds of things to consider. It would make it a lot sort of scarier, whereas I just had making sure that I had my bills and rent covered to think about. So I think from that kind of practical side, I was able to kind of see it being a more viable option. I always liked the idea of being able to work for myself. I always liked the idea of traveling. So it was around the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, that I thought I wanted to go and do a sort of a longer term traveling stint. And I had everything booked from the dates of the beginning of March 2020. But then this thing came along and just completely derailed my plans. But that was the thing actually that sort of nudged me to make the leap. And I did have the benefit of people that I worked for before were interested in speaking to me about freelancing. So I do think that whenever I talk about it, I just think with freelancing, if you can work hard, do a good job and be nice to people, it is probably the easiest way to at least sort of get the ball rolling as having a good reputation. Because so much of it is just word of mouth, and people like making recommendations. Like they like to be that person that when someone says, "Oh, do you know where so-and-so?" They like to be like, "Oh yes, I've got a number." Or,
yeah, I mean,
it does help.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think you're right. I think there's the relationship building with clients and being there and working hard and just doing a good job and not being a dickhead kind of thing is the way of managing that. I guess what I'm thinking of copywriters who are watching this going, I want to get to that stage. I'm trying to be hard on myself and think about it, but it's always, the question is always, yeah, but how do you get that first few clients? How do you get, but as you prove, certainly the way I've gone through it and countless other people in lucky positions, you've got to get those first few in-house jobs. You've got to find a way into those relationships. And then once you've got at least one, that then kind of has that cumulative effect whereby you will get someone else will come. It becomes a bit kind of like, you just got to trust that process. If you just do the work well, it tends to, people will, as you say, people like to spread good contacts. It's a weird way of saying that.
True. It's
but it is.
Isn't
People
it?
do. Like, they go, oh yeah, no, I use that person. So we were just talking before we were recording. Lee Davies, who does the design work thing, he's there and he's always helping me. So I will always say to people, if they're talking about designer, I mean, he works in house, so he can't always do it, but I will always talk about that person because it's, that's I know that person in that world. That's my person for that. So you should check them out. And if you know a good copywriter, I can immediately, if you say like the health niche, I'm thinking of copywriters. If you think of this niche, I'm thinking of that copywriter. So you constantly kind of develop that. And I think businesses do that, but the only way you do that is by being good and being a nice person and putting the work in. So I'm interested just on a purely nebby, like looking through the net curtains like my old Nana used to do. You're in Portugal at the moment. Where do you have a plan to go other places? What's the kind of future look like traveling wise?
So all my stuff has been packed up in a 15 square foot storage unit since October last year. So I'm 6 months or more into this now. I was in Mexico for 2 months at the start of the year. I went to New York for a little bit, and I've been from north to south of Portugal at the moment, and I'll be going to Amsterdam hopefully in September. I'll be back in the UK for festival season. It's erratic, and it is quite hard work. When I say that, it's such hard work. It's I'd say it's a different challenge mentally, to be able to kind of organize your thoughts, organize your energies, and to make sure you're grounded and you have a good sort of view on everything. And also traveling around, you are probably tempted to, prioritize everything like it's a holiday, making that shift from thinking, oh, I'm traveling and I'm on holiday all the time, to being like, no, this is just, I'm existing in different places now, has probably been one of the biggest barriers to work through.
How do you go about that? Do you treat it like a 9 to 5 kind of thing, or how do you manage that? I'm interested in that.
So it's kind of like making sure that my schedule works for me. So as I said, I've got Moju are my sort of regular clients. So I know, for example, that I will always have my days reserved for them. And then there's a few others which are more ad hoc. There's a studio called Studio Chong that I collaborate with frequently. So I've got always in my head is like a little concentric circles type thing where I've got my core regular clients in the middle. Then I've got like my layer of sort of ad hoc clients that might come through every now and again. And then I've got like space for others around the outside. So I have to make sure I prioritize my regulars, but I'm always on the lookout to be able to see if there's anyone else that I would like to work with in the future. And then it will be a case of making my schedule fit around that. But it's good to be able to try and plan a few weeks ahead. But as a freelancer, it's not always guaranteed. But
that's fascinating. Yeah. I'm envious, especially in Amsterdam. I've wanted to work in Amsterdam and like live for a period in Amsterdam for a long time. So
I'll have to get you over for a coffee or something.
Yes, definitely. We've been talk about doing like a fixed-based trip to Amsterdam at some point, and also Berlin at some point. But we did one to Paris. Well, it must have been like a year or two ago, but it was lovely. We had like 20 or so copywriters kind of in a pub, disappointingly in an English pub in Paris, drinking a beer that was called Brexit, probably, I think it was, ironically. And I was like, we've come to Paris and we're sat in an English pub drinking Brexit. This is the worst experience of my life. But anyway, it was nice despite that. But yeah, no, we'll definitely try and get out to Amsterdam. Well, it's been fascinating. I'm fascinated by your story and your experience. And I hope people find it interesting. I certainly do. And I think, as I say, I think the big takeaway for me, it's almost, and I've described your life as banal, Lucy. It's almost banal, but it's not. And it's generally not. It's that idea that you started with a passion for like writing those blogs, doing that, so figured out what you want to do. And then you've gone, right, okay, where do I do this? Who do I get? How do I build my experience in that world? And then that gives you the freedom to now be sat in Portugal and be going to Amsterdam and going around Mexico doing the thing you started having the passion for. And it's quite an obvious, as I say, I feel like I'm just insulting you, banal, obvious, disgusting. No, but it is like a normal, it's like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. But we so often try and complicate it, try and put different things. That's all you got to do. Like find your passion, develop it, understand that you need more people to kind of show you the world around, and then learn who you are, and then go and do that. And that's what you seem to have done, which is great.
Yeah, I do think there's something to be said for this. I feel like there's some shame attached around, especially with creative professions, if you use it like a tool to get what you want, rather than it being solely for the art and solely being like, oh, I live and breathe copywriting. Not everyone does. I'm super fortunate and super grateful to be able to do what I do. I love it. I absolutely love it. But it's also much cooler for me, given the fact it's helping me to live my life how I want to. And I think, I've got friends that work in hospitals or have to be in an office 9 to 5, 5 days a week now, even post-COVID. And I know that it's a luxury to be able to do this. And I just make sure that I'm grateful for it and I appreciate it. And yeah, also just encourage other people to do it if they can, because why not? That's all I say.
Why not? In fact, I'm on Portugal. Right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Lucy. People can go and find out more about you and connect with you. And if they're in one of the many regions of the world that you are flitting about in, I'm sure you will be happy to say hello. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me.